Sometimes you read some headlines that both make you incredibly mad, but also somewhat hopeful. Resident Evil Requiem devs reveal RE9 was an online open world shooter, but realized no one actually wanted that. They realized it, guys. They realized nobody wanted that. This is not just going to be about RE9 today, and also my videos are usually more about PC gaming performance and hardware reviews. Today's more about games industry in general, bit of a rant, some thoughts, whatever, it's what we're doing today. Because, oh man, I have so many thoughts. So here's the thing, there's been so many games and beloved franchises of mine that have just got worse and worse as they chased what they thought would be the more profitable way to go. And Resident Evil 9 looks like it was going to be the next one to just destroy everything a franchise is. Yes, online open world shooters can make money, not that everyone does, but why does Resident Evil need to be that? But again, they realized no one actually wanted that. Thank you. In time to, well, I mean, we haven't had the game yet, but trailers are looking promising here. I want a compelling single-player horror game from Resident Evil, and it can do well on those terms. And that's awesome. But let's talk about some other game examples here. Square Enix acknowledges Expedition 33's success as inspiration for next Final Fantasy as turn-based, but as turn-based is still beloved by gamers. So guys, I'm old. I'm older than you might think. I've been playing Final Fantasy games since the 2D era, and they have in many ways become worse. Not in every way, but in many ways they become worse. So for example, Final Fantasy 16, I finished the game. It wasn't awful, but I'll be honest, the combat systems in a lot of more modern Final Fantasy games have just felt like they're ashamed to try to be an interesting turn-based system, and yet a lot of what's been so praised in Expedition 33 is actually systems that are similar to things we have seen in previous Final Fantasy games. A lot of these Lumina-based system it reminds me so much of Final Fantasy VII's Materia system. A lot of the action real-time combat events. I mean, I remember back into it's been in several of them, but we have Final Fantasy VIII where you had Squall. I remember having to time the little button presses on his certain attacks. Like, Final Fantasy has had this, and Square Enix themselves, I mean, Square helped develop Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars on the Super Nintendo, one of my favorite games growing up in elementary school, and that game had timed defend button presses and getting timing systems correct to do multiple jumps. Final Fantasy, Square Enix, all of them have done the things that Clair Obscur has done successfully in the past, but they abandoned it because they just felt like, I guess, people are just not looking for turn-based things. And one of the points of my video today, if I even have one other than just ranting about loosely connected stuff, is that I think developers shouldn't be afraid to do what they do well instead of chasing what has been successful in other games recently, for such a wide variety of reasons. One thing is, if you just try to do what another game already did better, why are people gonna buy your game instead of just play that one, especially when game development these days takes so many years to develop a game? And I just use the word game developers here, but in reality, I think a lot of this is done more at the business suit level of decision making, and game developers get to make the game that they're told to make, not necessarily the one that they want to make, which is another nice thing about Expedition 33. There was so much cool about the development of this game when you look into it, but this is game developers just going out and being like, hey, why work for these big studios being told to make the games we don't want to make when we could just make the game we want to make ourselves together? And they did, and it's awesome, and it's selling well, and it's my favorite game of the year so far, and honestly one of my top 10 games of all time. It is amazing. And this isn't the only example we've seen of things like this. So, for example, Another one of my favorite game franchises of all times and game studios in general was Dragon Age Origins. Loved it, and in many ways it's gotten worse with each entry since then. But the studio BioWare, they were known for CRPGs. Baldur's Gate 2, Knights of the Old Republic, so many just incredible games that had amazing writing, characters you loved, and choices that mattered. And you know what? There's still game developers doing that. The obvious comparison is Baldur's Gate 3, and all signs point to Baldur's Gate 3 selling massively higher copies. We're talking orders of magnitude higher than Dragon Age the Veilguard, which seems to be a financial disaster. But if you look into the troubled development history of Dragon Age the Veilguard, it looks like this was a mess of trying to turn into like a live service multiplayer title and then being told, no, never mind, let's not do that, and getting pulled in different directions all over the place, where even just having choices at all was something that was added as a last minute, which is why they felt so superficial. And there were so many things about this game that are just like, okay, some of this game design would be perfectly acceptable game design if you didn't try to call it Dragon Age. If you just want to make some live service slop in a fantasy setting, go for it. But how about you also just make a Dragon Age game, like Origins? It would actually sell well if you deliver on the quality, which Baldur's Gate 3 has shown. But you might be like, well, they couldn't possibly have known that Baldur's Gate would sell well during the development of Dragon Age. But that is actually not true. For example, how about the game that Larian made before Baldur's Gate 3? Divinity Original Sin 2. There was many signs that it had sold multiple millions of copies, way more than Dragon Age the Veilguard has sold, by the way, when compared, and this game came out years before. This was during the development of Dragon Age the Veilguard. They could have seen that this style of game is still profitable, and there is still a demand for it. And yet it flops. But it's just confusing because BioWare had already seen that people didn't want BioWare games to be live service crap. We already saw them make and fail with Anthem, which was then, I think, part of what contributed to them kind of realizing behind the scenes, oh crap, maybe this isn't what we should do with the next Dragon Age. And then all of that pivoting. But God, why was that even something they were considering in the first place? Not every game franchise needs to be wasted by trying to turn it into the same live service slop that every single other, that has already seen success elsewhere, right? Because also people can only play so many live service games. They're not going to necessarily switch to your new one just because you threw what used to be a respected franchise's name on it when that franchise was respected for being something completely different. Our developers and publishers really, again, it's not, I keep saying developer, but man, it's really more the suits up in the industry. Are they finally getting the memo? Because, for example, Bungie was going to be releasing Marathon in September, but it is now delayed indefinitely because of just massive negative feedback here. Bungie had, just absolutely exploded with the Halo games, and then they've been doing their own thing with Destiny, and I get that and all that, but all signs point to Marathon just not being anything to do with the old Marathon games or things that Bungie was necessarily strong about. Trying to turn this into some sort of weird like extraction shooter? What is even going on here? But are they finally getting the memo that maybe this isn't what they should be developing? But I mean, there's so many developers doing this kind of weird crap. Why does every game developer, again, I keep saying developer, I should be saying publisher mostly, feel like they have some need to do this? For example, we just had Remedy, known for really like quirky and interesting, very unique single-player focused games like Alan Wake 2, Control, Quantum Break, all sorts of cool stuff. For some reason, developing a live service multiplayer game with FBC Firebreak. and it does not launch well. I mean, there are some signs that it is getting some amount of players' interest. It did get over 1 million players, but keep in mind that it's available for free on services like PlayStation Plus and Game Pass. The Steam numbers, where you would actually, have to pay for the game, look terrible. So in other words, if you give it out for free, people might give it a shot, but are they sticking around? I mean, maybe they'll be able to salvage it. But again, my question is like, why are we taking the Control universe where the coolest stuff about it is the interesting story elements to it, and then for some reason we're making this into a multiplayer live service game? Like, this just doesn't make sense to me. Are publishers finally waking up? I mean, maybe, but they also might be kind of not really quite understanding the issue. For example, another epic failure here, although this wasn't taking a beloved single-player, brand name and slapping it on something else, but Concord massively failed trying to chase an already saturated and kind of stale market and doing absolutely nothing to set itself apart. Sony believes Concord failed because of an overly competitive market. Well, there's a lot of stuff that caused it to fail, but it's also not completely incorrect that it is overly competitive. So again, it's just crazy to me that all of these big brands have seemed to be just afraid of being themselves and carving out their own identity, rather than just being generic slop using just generic crap that has worked for somebody else. Apparently, like, the average successful game has these features. Now let's take our brand name game that is none of those things and just try to force some of these just things that have, on average been in games that made lots of money, and throw this brand name on top of that. And that's, anyway. Now, what is actually selling well right now? So I did want to look into this to see where things are actually currently at. So the top 10 selling video games year-to-date 2025 as of, this was, I think, updated at the end of May. This is from Circana Research. So Monster Hunter Wilds has sold big, Assassin's Creed Shadows has sold big, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered has sold big, we've got Call of Duty Black Ops 6, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. So, I mean, I don't know what developers are actually going to learn from this. I just know that, like, I don't think throwing a big brand name on something that just isn't what gave that brand its big name in the first place is the right direction for game development. Now, maybe to bring this back around to something that's at least a little more in my channel niche, which tends to be more on game performance and things like that. And I would say that developers are certainly not going to be learning that they need to optimize their games to be successful. I know a little bit of a shift here at the end, but that's really what I got out of this. As I was looking at this, okay, biggest selling game of the year so far, Monster Hunter Wilds. Terribly optimized game. Oh man, the performance to visuals ratio in this game is just not there. Assassin's Creed Shadows can run reasonably well on consoles, and on PC it's kind of weird. Like, it's okay, it's not hard to run it at like mediocre frame rates, but to try to hit high frame rates in this game can be extremely challenging. And then Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered, now that's a game that runs absolutely terribly on just everything. And if you think it works fine on your system, it's because you just don't perceive the issues. And maybe that's kind of my thought there is like, maybe just, a lot of people probably just don't care about performance. That's probably the general thing. They just want a good game. Now, are these good games? That's subjective. I am kind of happy to see things like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 making it fairly high up on the list so far as far as big sales numbers goes, because again, this is showing that you can do these really, really, like, you would feel like this would be an incredibly niche single player thing given how systems heavy this is. It's not holding your hands. It's doing none of the things that it seems like the game publishers feel like you need to do to sell huge. And yet it's making it pretty high up on the list so far. Again, because no, I'm not saying that like other big, more generic stuff can't sell higher. But the thing is, like, I don't think, and maybe this isn't the way the big suits in the top of the game industry is, but like, not every game needs to be your like 20 million unit seller, like stuff appealing to the absolute like mass market. You can still sell millions of copies and be profitable doing something that is your own thing. And that's really, I think, if I'm going to sum up what I want to see here, is that I really hope that game publishers, whoever are the decision makers on what is getting funded and what the targets are for the game in the first place, I'm really hoping more of them realize no one actually wants you to take beloved game franchises with their own identity and try to just make some generic, this is the average thing that sells well according to metrics, thing, and then just slap a beloved franchise name on it. That is not the way to keep those franchises successful. And honestly, if you're just trying to make the same generic crap that's already out there, people are already playing their generic game with those elements in it. What is you gonna do that's gonna make them switch over to that? And it's not just throwing a brand name on it. Like, let's just stick the Resident Evil name on some generic open world shooter and people are gonna buy that? Why would people buy that? The people who buy Resident Evil aren't the people who are buying online open world shooters. Or if they are, that's not why they're buying Resident Evil. They're already playing some other open world shooter. This is not what this game needs to be. And I'm very glad that the developers realized no one actually wanted that. And let's hope that there's more moments of clarity like this in the people making decisions in the game industry before the whole thing just collapses on itself with terrible decision making. I hope all of you have an excellent day, because there's actually potentially some good news here.